Okay, and here comes Zoe. So that's the end of the Hebrew jokes. All right. Okay, so we're getting underway. You're the only online participant at the moment, Ms. Brown. So let's get underway and drag ourselves back from holiday land where you've been lying by the beach and counting the coconuts as they fall onto the sand. No?
Is that what it's like at your house?
I was at work.
Yeah, I was at work in the city.
I know you were at Mooloolaba or somewhere like that for the first couple of days. That was 2 weeks ago. Goodness, lifetime ago. Okay, so Chris will let anybody else who pops in and wants to join us that I don't spot, and I'll just focus on this. So tonight we move into the verbs. But let's start with our acknowledgement of country, and I'm going to just add another prayer for the peoples of Israel and Palestine as well. So we acknowledge on this eve of the referendum, we acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, who are the first peoples of the land here. We honour them and their ancestors for their survival, their continued traditions and spiritual connections to and caring of country, land, sea, water, land, sky, water and sea. We pay respects to their elders, past and present, and we'll continue to support their right to self-determination. And we're committed to reconciliation and respectfully recognise that sovereignty has never been ceded. And of course, exactly the same prayer could be offered for the Palestinians, who've lost several rounds of war, but have never said, okay, you can have it. We're just going to go. So we pray for all the peoples of the land, whether they're Jewish or Palestinian. And the Palestinians, of course, include some Jews, a few. Palestinian community also includes a majority of Muslims. It includes Druze. It includes Christians of various denominations. There's at least 13 official Christian churches in Israel, Palestine. And you've got Baha'i and various other faith communities there. All of them are in profound shock and horror at what's happened in the last week. In some ways because they've been practicing not looking at the horrors which were happening all around them every day. And I guess a parable of that is that when Israel built the separation wall between the West Bank and Israel in the center of the country, people driving down to work in Tel Aviv complained that seeing the concrete wall made them depressed. And it does have machine guns and barbed wire and stuff on top. So the Israelis very kindly did some landscaping. So they dumped lots and lots of dirt on the Israeli side of the 5-metre high concrete wall and planted little shrubs. So it just looks like a nice little garden. And you've got to look really closely to see the occasional gun turret sticking up above the shrubs. So that for the Israelis driving up and down the highway, there's nothing to see here. We don't mean to feel stressed. For the Palestinians on the other side, it's a 5-metre high wall with gun towers every 100 metres or so, which have automatic machine guns that will fire as soon as an electronic signal says somebody or some animal has come within the closed zone. But at least it looks reassuring from Highway 6. You drive up and down at 120 k's an hour. That's when you're sticking to the speed limit. We mostly drive at 140. So the legacy of colonialism and the European assumptions about our right to take someone else's land are all over the place, and none of us can point fingers, but all of us can care and have compassion for those involved. So let's go into our Shema Yisrael. I'm going to turn off the little bits because you guys don't need that anymore, do you?
Some of us do.
Yes, well, it's gone. So, all right, there you go.
To be you, Eve, sorry.
All right, for the sake of Eve, we'll leave them turned on. I'm trying to actually get rid of all the pictures that are on top of my text, but anyway, I think I know the words. So let's just say this thoughtfully and prayerfully, remembering the prophetic call to justice. So Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. wa ahabta et Adonai Elohayach. Bekol levavka ubekol nafshika ubekol ma'odka, with all your strength. So with all your heart, levavka, with all your spirit or soul, and with all your might or strength. Interesting, Jesus added an extra one, with all your mind, when he does a bit of a riff on this in the Synoptic Gospels. And then moving to slightly more familiar territory, except I've taken all the hyphens out. So let's just read it through slowly, and I'll read it and you can just kind of mutter along below me if you like. The first line you should be really familiar with by this stage of the week. Pater haimon ha entois urinois, hagias theto ta onoma su, el theto he basileia su, genetheto ta thalema su, hos en urino kai epi geis, ton aton haimon ton epiusion, dos haimin samaron, kai aphes haimin, ta ophalemata haimon, hos kai humes aphaikaman tois ophaleitois haimon. Oh, I left a hyphen in. Kai me eis enenkes humas eis pyrasmon, ala urusai humas apo tu poneru. Okay. So, before we jump into the cultural knowledge and talk about ancient cities, let me just do a quick heads up, a reminder about where we're up to with the assessment. So we've done week 6 quiz. That was worth up to 20% of the marks. We're almost finished the weekly quizzes, only 2 more left to go. So, and they were worth 20%. So there's 4 more marks to be gained next week and the week after. So at the moment, if you are adding up your marks, you basically add them up out of 36. And so, I mean, most people have got a mark in the high 20s or early 30s out of 36. So people are traveling pretty well. I've clearly been way too soft with the assessment items. In week 12, we'll have the second of the mid-semester quizzes, 6-week quizzes. They were originally designed because we're supposed to do Greek for 6 weeks and then forget about Greek, not really, Chris, and then do Hebrew for 6 weeks. And so the week 6 quiz was intended to be the Greek quiz. The week 12 quiz was originally designed to be the Hebrew quiz, except I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do Greek and Hebrew all the way through. So we were stuck with the week 6 and the week 12, each is with 20%. Week 6 focus on material from weeks 1 to 5. And the week 12 quiz will focus on material from 6 to 10, or maybe 7 to 10, whatever. It's the second half, but obviously not what we're doing in week 12 because we've only just done it that night. It will be similar in design to what we did in week 12, except it's a little bit more sophisticated by that stage of the course, like namely the last hour of the last week. Sounds very apocalyptic, doesn't it? The last day, the last hour, on the last moment, we'll do the week 12 quiz, and the items will expect you to be able to work with the information, not simply regurgitate it. Okay, and you're practicing some of those skills at the moment with the parse and translate exercises. Okay, it's not enough just to look up a coordinates and copy it anymore. You've actually got to show me that you know what it means. So, for example, if it says our Father and it tells you that haimon is first person plural genitive, you don't translate it as I. Okay, I is the lexical form of the pronoun, first person pronoun, but I is not the meaning of the genitive plural. It will be our, as in our Father. Okay, so it's that kind of actually looking at what you've grabbed out of accordance and being able to do something with it. Again, if the line about let your will, may your name be held holy, may your name be sanctified, that verb is is a aorist passive imperative. Now, we'll know more about that in the next few weeks, but the translation has to reflect that. We don't want to know what the lexical meaning is, because that'll be present indicative act and first person singular. Okay, we need to know what does it mean when it's second person singular, aorist, passive, imperative, and it means may your name be sanctified, because that makes it passive. Okay, so to sanctify is not a translation of hagiasto or whatever the Greek word is, something like that. Just don't question me, just assume I'm right and all will be well. It's worked so far in my life. Most of the time, not always. So that's the week 12 quiz. It's only going to have 5 or 6 items. It's not going to have the 10. The bad news is those 5 or 6 items are going to ask you to think a bit more than the other 10 did in week 6. That's already up. It's done. It's already on the website, ready to rock and roll in a couple of weeks' time, 4 weeks' time. And then in week 14, on Thursday at 6 o'clock, there will be the week 14 test or the final assessment, and that'll be worth 40% of the marks. But unlike the week 12 test, it will cover material from week 1 to week 12. Okay. And again, we've tried to construct the instruments of torture in such a way that you will be able to demonstrate, not that you know how to look this stuff up and copy and paste, but you know how to use it in gentle ways. We don't expect you to be as good as Chris just yet. Okay, so that's so we're almost at the end of the first 40%. In week 12, we do the next 20%, which takes us up to 60%. And then on week 14, we'll do the final assessment item, which is worth 40%, and that'll finish the assessment collation. I imagine most people will do that quiz, not necessarily at 6 o'clock on Thursday, but it'll open at 6 o'clock, and it'll be open for 2 or 3 days, like until Sunday night or whatever. So I'm not sure when we want to have our class party. Okay, we might still want to do that on the week 12, when at least some of us will be here. Okay. We should bring in some Greek food. We should bring in some, well, we could just be Mediterranean food, because that'll cover Hebrew as well as Greek. So anyway, that's kind of where things are going. So if people are interested in making a special effort to be in here for week 12, then maybe when we get to 8 o'clock or whatever, we just bring out the wine and the nibbles and do whatever.
Even cry.
And then you can do the week 12 quiz when you get home.
So what about our tutorials for the night?
Well, okay. Well, we could do that while we're eating. You can hold off with your wine. Zoe will be fine. She'll have her glass of wine in Dolby. She's not driving anywhere.
I won't be holding off on the wine.
Anyway, so we
It
need to do a little bit
beside the computer.
just out of camera view. So that's kind of where I see things going in the next couple of weeks. Okay. So the cultural knowledge tonight is to think a bit about the ancient city. And here's an image of the Acropolis in Athens. Okay. Now this, of course, is not the whole city. It's just literally the Acropolis. So one of the features of any ancient city, guess what? They had to deal with the geography. They had to deal with the local shape of the piece of land where the city was built. And it was always good to have a hill, because then as now, it's easier to shoot downhill than to shoot uphill. Whether you're shooting arrows or bullets, it's better to be on top of the hill shooting down. It's also good to be on top of the hill because sewage flows downwards. So all your rubbish, all your waste flows down. And who lives at the bottom of the hill? The poor people. Who lives on the top of the hill? The prince, or in this case, the god. But so Athens is a little bit unusual, but you can see there's major public infrastructure on the Acropolis, on this amazing feature. Then down below you had the marketplace, the agora, and the Areopagus, and so on. So then you get more of the standard street. But Athens was unusual because it had had this big public infrastructure devoted to the cult of Athena, okay, the patron of Athens. Just remember, we'll come back to this, but notice the idea of these temples is a temple is more like a war memorial in our culture. Okay, well, you don't invite all the crowd on Anzac Day to come inside the Australia War Memorial or to go inside the Eternal Flame in Ann Street. Well, not the flame, but I mean the little circly thing. Okay? It's designed to have thousands of people outside, and there's a holy object. Might be the Eternal Flame, it might be the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, whatever. But the temples had a tiny little, relatively speaking, a tiny little god box where there'd be the statue of the gods, but all the action took place outside because these were mass events attended by everybody in town who was anybody, sort of like Anzac Day. Okay, so with that background, let's jump in. So the city, the Greek city. So up the top you can see Har-Ir, and you all know what that means. The city, Ir is not one of these. Ir is a city, okay? And on the other side, we have Polis, city in Greek. So let's just quickly go through this. Oh, got two ticks at once. I want to suggest that the earliest cities, and I'm talking about ancient Jerusalem, but that's actually a fairly new place. I'm talking about Tyre. I'm talking about Babylon. I'm talking about the different Egyptian capitals, okay? These were not, they were cities, but they're not cities in the sense that we're talking about. They were just the fortified headquarters of the biggest thug in that part of the world. They were the military headquarters of the emperor or the king or the pharaoh, as the case may be, okay? So they're just really fortified imperial garrisons. They're more like an English castle than a city in that sense, okay? When we're talking about the Greek city, we're talking about imagining how people live together in a different way. And the Greek city was a self-conscious community who had certain obligations and certain privileges, particularly if you're a male landowner. Then you were a member of the demos, the people. Another word besides laos, there's demos, meaning the people. And of course, democracy is the kratos, the rule of the demos. But the people are not every adult over 18 years of age. The demos in Athens are the free-born, land-owning males. Nobody else was a citizen. Nobody else got to vote. And if you were born somewhere else, you could never be a citizen of Athens. Sort of like being a president of the US if you're not born there. Okay. What a pity Trump was born in the, never mind. Okay. So these cities had a kind of an understanding of how the city and should function, and particularly Greek philosophers like Socrates and Plato and so on, and Aristotle, they wrote treatises on politics and the arrangement of the city and what a good city looked like, meaning a properly worked out society. The polis was a structured society in a particular location. It did have certain public institutions like a gymnasium and a bathhouse and a hippodrome and so on, but it had a way of functioning, and within different parts of the city there were people who were not citizens, but they had functions within the city to make the society work. Okay, and slaves and craftsmen and foreigners and so on all had their place, but only the citizens got to vote. Okay, and the citizens were wealthy males, basically. Another interesting point to note is when they gathered for their assembly, it was called ecclesia, and this is so ek meaning out of, okay, and kaleo is the verb for call. So the ecclesia were the people called out from the population to be the assembly to run the city, their parliament. Ecclesia, of course, is the word that Paul uses for the Christian community, the citizens of the kingdom of God, the ones who were called out to be the ecclesia, as we say in English, if we're half Latin or something. So there's all this stuff in the background which is relevant to both ancient and modern Christianity. With the conquest of Alexander, the idea of the Greek city got spread all over the ancient Near East, particularly famously in a city like Alexandria in Egypt. But from memory, there was something, not that I was there was something like 70 Alexandrias established in honor of him, because that's a pretty, like Georgetown. Who's Georgetown named after? George III. What's Jamestown named after in Virginia? What's Virginia named after? The Virgin Queen. So, you know, there's sort of relics of empire in the names of American political, civic structures. So you've got this kind of this network of cities all over the ancient Near East, wherever the Greeks went, as it were, and these became seedbeds of Greek culture. And they sort of modeled a lifestyle which the indigenous people could aspire to. And that's one of the problems when you get to the Maccabean revolt and the Hasmoneans. It was a very attractive lifestyle to embrace Greek culture. Okay. So these places are significant. Of course, they put cities on the major trading routes. Wonder why. But these also became centers of learning and cultural influence. They tended to be major mints, which in the Roman period were authorized to issue silver coins. Gold coins, of course, were only ever minted in Rome during the Roman Empire. And so more locally in Palestine, you have the Decapolis. Deca is 10. So the Decapolis is a league or association of 10 cities, each of them autonomous, but they kind of hung out together. And they were recognized by different imperial powers as this series of self-governing cities that had their own kind of mutual defense agreement. Okay. Now, that included places like Damascus, Amman, Beth Shan, and at the time, Amman was called Philadelphia, which of course means city of brotherly love. Okay. And we actually don't, just like the 12 disciples, you can't actually name 12 disciples. Okay, it doesn't quite fit. There's more than 12 people who get listed at different times, just like there's more than 10 commands in the 10 commandments. Okay, and similarly with the Decapolis, we can't actually name specifically which were the 10 cities. Some of them are, obvious. So Philadelphia, Amman, Jerash, we'll see some photos from there in a moment, also called Gerasa, Bethshan, also called Scythopolis, because it's the city of the Scythians. Someone had a bad night out. Damascus, and Gadara, and probably Bostra. But when it comes to which were the 10, it's actually the ancient sources don't agree on exactly which. The top 4 or 5 or 6, easy. The last 3 or 4, we're not too sure which cities were in the Decapolis. So it was a bit like the Anzus Treaty. It was a concept more than a reality. Okay. And they rarely feature in the New Testament, although they were a very powerful expression of Greek culture. The only one of the Decapolis on the west bank of the Jordan River is Bethshan, never mentioned in the New Testament. It was a city of 40,000 people. Huge place. Nazareth was like 300. Okay. Sepphoris might have been 2,000, 3,000 on a good weekend. Okay. Tiberias in the time of Jesus would have been a few hundred. Brand new town. Nobody lived there yet. It's built on a cemetery. No one wanted to go there. Okay? So Bethshan is this great gorilla of a city at the eastern tip of the plain of Jezreel, where it goes into the Jordan Valley, very strategic location, never mentioned. Well, one would have been another one would probably have been Hippos, also called Susita, which means little horse. So the Herodians got into this game. This is pretty cool. Wittgenstein cities. So Herod creates the city. He took over an old beach town and he made it a city and he developed it architecturally and he called it Caesarea. Okay, we say Caesarea, but it's this, named it after Caesar. Like, look at me, look what I've done for you. We're buddies. Meanwhile, in the north, his son, when he takes over the town of Banias or Panias, and he renames it Caesarea Philippi, Caesar's town that Philip built. Look at me, I'm nearly as good as my daddy. Okay. Antipas, the other brother who survived all the dynastic upheaval, he builds the city of Tiberias from scratch at 9 o'clock on the Sea of Galilee. It does get a mention in the New Testament. It was a brand new settlement in the time of Jesus, probably founded in the year 18. Okay, so 10 years later, Jesus and John the Baptist are going dink, 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 dink around Palestine, and Tiberias is just the paint is still wet in Tiberias. And meanwhile, at Bethsaida, the home of Peter and a number of other of the apostles, Philip eventually decides to rename Bethsaida. He promotes it to the status of city and calls it Julia. And he does this on the first anniversary of the death of Tiberius's mother. And guess what her name was? Julia. Okay. So we can see what's going on. Founding a city is a good, gets you in good with the government, and also means you can put on your business card, otherwise called a coin, city builder. Okay, look at me, look at me. Now there's a symbiotic relationship between the city and its hinterland. So for example, Sepphoris was surrounded by quite a large number of villages, and Josephus describes going from village to village to village at the outbreak of the Jewish war, because he was the commander of the Jewish forces in Galilee, and he's going to their synagogues, meaning to their town hall meetings, encouraging them to join the revolt. But the city of Sepphoris refused to join the revolt. So Josephus attacks it and captures the city. Okay, but so this is symbiotic relationship. The city sucked all the wealth and energy out of the country, and many people say that's exactly what the Queensland government does. And of course, this comes as a bit of a culture shock. Christianity was a religion of the cities, not of the country folk. And the word for country folk was pagani, pagans. Okay, so hasn't life changed? These days, the place of religion is somewhat reversed, city and countryside. So before I just spent the whole class talking about this, let's look at Jerash. This is one of the towns of the Decapolis. Here's the map. Now notice, I don't have the annotations on, but notice this map is a kind of a map of the ruins that are there now, and it includes temples, pagan temples, and Christian churches, almost side by side. Okay, so I'm going to bring up two little dots, a red dot and a green dot, and this is standing at the red dot and looking south down the main street, okay, which is called the Decumanus. So I just do that again. There's the red dot, and see this street that's running more or less. It's running from sort of 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock. That's the main street. Okay. And then where number 21 is, that's where the Cardo, the north-south, intersects the Decumanus, which is running east-west. And where the Cardo and the Decumanus intersect was called the Tetra Pylon, because there were 4 big pillars there. And of course, they were also public shrines. There'd be sacred objects. And that was like, I met Jesus at the crossroads, where the 2 roads meet kind of thing. That's that tetrapylon. the crossroads in the middle of town. So the red dot we're going to show you is looking down from just outside the Temple of the Nymphs, and the green dot is the big southern plaza. So this is standing where the red dot was and looking south. And I love these old roads. You can actually see the tracks that are worn in the stones by the ancient carts going up and down the street. Okay. And you may not be able to pick it up, but there's actually a round circular kind of stone there. That's the inspection point for the underground sewer system, or the waste water system. And the road is convex, so the water drains off to both sides. And then there are holes every so long which collect the rainwater. And from these inspection points, you could actually get down and unblock any problems you had. So that's from the red dot looking south. And then this is down at the bottom in the plaza. So behind me is kind of the southern tip of that cardo. And here's me holding court with my students, hanging off every word while I stand in the plaza. Okay. That's at Duras. So I'm trying to give you a sense of the sort of physical arrangement of space of an ancient city. We come to Byzantine Jerusalem. We're familiar with the Madaba map, and here's a kind of schematic representation of Jerusalem in the Byzantine period. And see the circle around the little pillar? That's referring to the pillar which used to be just inside the Damascus Gate. The pillar is no longer there. The pillar hasn't been there for more than 1,000 years. But in Arabic, that gate is still called Bab al-Amud, the gate of the pillar, because they don't forget anything. Not because they're Arabs, just because they're local people. They don't forget anything. And they did some excavations a decade or so ago at the entrance just inside the Damascus Gate, and they found the base of the pillar, exactly where the Madaba map said it would be. Okay. Down here is the Church of the Resurrection, also known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And that's the spot here, okay, on the map. And then going down further into the Cardo, I've just selected a section of the Cardo. And what I'm going to show you now, that is a section of the surviving part of the Cardo south of the Holy Sepulchre. So that's what a shopping district looked like, probably in slightly better repair in the Byzantine period. Okay. Now, in this very same space, just at the wall over there, an artist has created this amazing painting which shows what the street would have looked like 1,500 years ago. Sort of colonnades on both sides, shelter, and booths, and these kind of arched shop fronts all the way along. And literally, you've actually got some ancient pillars right there that are still extant, and then this large mural begins. What I love best is down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a modern boy wearing his baseball cap back to front and his backpack on his shoulders, and he's talking to an ancient girl. And you've got this lovely sort of dialogue going on between these two kids. Okay. Would have been quite a noisy, bustling shopping centre. That's the main street of Jerusalem, the Cardo from heart. Okay, the heart of the city. Actually, we always say it's from Cardo for heart. It's actually it points to the cardinal direction. So it's the Cardo because it runs north-south, if possible. It's not actually from Cardia.
When was that painted?
When was it painted? Oh, only about 20 years ago. Yeah. So that area has been excavated. They found the remains of the Cardo, and someone said, okay, why don't we do a mural here? And there's a similar kind of mural on the side of a bank in Tiberias showing what that area would have looked like 2,000 years ago. They're quite powerful pieces of work. So this is an image of what the Holy Sepulchre would have looked like when it was opened on the 17th of September, 335 or something, whatever it was. there's your cardo and the steps going from the cardo up into the atrium and then into the Hall of the Martyrs, that long rectangular building. Then you go out into an open courtyard, which is where the Rock of Golgotha is. And then beyond that, you go to what's called the Anastasis, which is the dome building above the tomb of Jesus. So that's the architectural design. Okay. And Mr. Zalatimo has actually sold his sweet shop. But when you're going through the cardo these days in Jerusalem, in the old city, going through the souk, if you know who to ask and where to go, there used to be a sweet shop there. And when we're at the college, when I was at the college at different times, we'd take people in there, and he would take us into the back of his kitchen. And his kitchen is built on top of those steps from the 4th century church. Okay. So once the Holy Sepulchre was destroyed by the Caliph of Egypt in about 1000 or so AD, then of course the whole place was smashed to pieces. And when it was reconstructed by the Crusaders, it was on a much smaller budget. And so then the sort of shopping centre just expanded. So the ancient gates steps are underneath Mr. Zalatimo's sweet shop. Taking the Anastasis structure, it would have looked like this. And right in the centre, under this massive dome, was the edicule, which is the tomb of Christ. And from various pilgrim badges and pilgrim drinking bottles, even in the medieval when people went to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage, they bought souvenirs. They'd buy a drinking bottle to carry their water home in, and it would have a design of the tomb of Christ to show they'd been there. And there are pilgrim pins and other things. So by comparing a number of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we've been able to reconstruct what the tomb of Jesus probably looked like in the Byzantine period. And that is what is now the badge of St. George's College, as it turns out. This is not a paid promotion, just mentioning stuff.
Curiosity.
Okay, so that's a bit of a sense of what how the sort of physical geography influenced the way people lived in the city. Any queries about that before we start wrestling with the verbs?
When you do your tours, what can we, like briefly, because I know you've only got time, but what would you expect? Would we sort of go there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's something that the college does, that St. Francis does?
I'm not sure anymore. We used to do it because I used to do it. Yeah. But that subject for doing a study tour to the Holy Land, that's now owned by another college, I think. So I don't know that St. Francis.
You're doing a tour, aren't you?
I'm doing a tour myself.
Sorry?
It's back to May now. We've pushed it back to May next year.
Hoping it all.
We couldn't go in December this year. It's too bad. So yeah, you depending on the program you're on and who the person is and how well they know the local situation. But in my case, I talk about you get to read the stones. I teach people to read the stones rather than to worry about the text, because that's my thing.
How long is your tour?
Oh, they're typically between 2 and 3 weeks, depending what I think I can get away with. So when we've gone to work on the dig at Bethsaida, it's 2 weeks on the dig and then another week of traveling in Jordan and Israel. Okay? When we're not doing the dig this year or next year now, so it'll be 2025 before the next season at Bethsaida at the dig. By which time I'm joking, I'll be walking around with a walking frame saying, "Oh no, over here. Dig over here. Keith, could you move that big rock, please? This is why we bring the young fellas. Okay, move that big rock. Don't bend your back." Okay, so let's jump into the verbs. So this is probably the last time I'm going to use this slide, but tonight is brought to you by Verbs. Okay, so let's think about verbs in English. Oh, before we do that, the onion. Okay, we all love cutting onions, right? And with onions, you're peeling one layer off after another. And that's kind of what we're going to do. We're going to explore the verbs just like we're peeling an onion. And it's not just because your eyes are going to hurt. Okay.
Did you get that from Shrek? No, okay, never mind. That's what they sound, Shrek.
I have seen Shrek. I used to work for a woman who looked remarkably like Shrek. But I'm not going.
Ogres
I
are
don't
We're
think you're allowed to say that these days.
Oh, she actually came dressed as Shrek with green makeup one time. It's really funny. Nobody thought she was in dress up. Okay, so we're going to go step by step and peel off the layers. Okay, I'm not saying where I used to work. Okay, so tonight we're just going to try and get the shape and the smell and the texture of verbs. Okay, you need to wash your hands afterwards. Next week we're going to be thinking about time, as in tense, past, present, future, and aspect. The following week, we're going to talk about mood and voice. Okay. And obviously, we'll say more about it when we get there. And then in the final week, we're going to look at infinitives and participles. You are not expected to know all this stuff across all these different varieties of verbs in 2 different languages. Okay. I mean, we've got 4 weeks. What's wrong with you guys? So the thing is, we need to know enough about how verbs work in English and in Greek and Hebrew. So like I said before, if accordance says this is an aorist passive imperative, we go, imperative mood. We know what that means. Passive voice, we know what that means. Aorist, so not something over and over again, but just do it. That's what's going on there. Or let it happen, because it's passive imperative. So we need to be able, we're learning how to use accordance, but we're learning enough about the languages and the verbs and so on to make it sound like we're smarter than we are. And that's certainly
About that though. You know, in the test, and we were translating the Greek, and when you pass
Yes, data.
it doesn't have our in any of the passing. It's got I and we. But we
yes, because that's the lexical. That's the lexical form.
Cleverly about it and
Yeah.
our. Is that what you're saying? That
Well, what you'll get at the end is a gloss.
Yeah.
And the gloss reflects the lexical form of that word.
Yeah.
The lexical form of haimon is haimais, I guess.
Yeah.
If it's plural, and ego if it's singular, but it's the first person personal pronoun, and in its singular form it means I, nominative.
Yeah.
But that's not what. But here it's genitive.
See, I wrote our, and I thought, well, I can't. It's not actually showing me it in.
But it is, because it says genitive.
I'll have to put we then, because I knew it wasn't I.
Yeah.
But I thought I had to stick to what was in accordance, because you wrote transliterate.
No, you said translate, because transliterate would be.
Translate. Well,
Literal
I said pars for this.
literal translation.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I can't. put
Yeah. So
what
a literal translation means you're not going to make it polished and beautiful like the NRSV.
Yeah.
Easy, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Got it.
Yeah.
On the translation. But by doing a literal translation, you're showing that you're using accordance, and you're doing a very wooden, ugly translation. So that line, as several of you have seen from my comments in response to your quiz, it will be a very literal translation would be Father of us. But you might want to say our Father, but Father of us, pater haimon, but haimon is of us or our. Haimon is not we.
I know what you mean, though.
But I know, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have it in accordance.
Well, no, it does. But the point is, I'm trying to teach how to use accordance.
Yeah.
Accordance will give you the lexical meaning. The lexical meaning is the simplest possible meaning. So if a verb, it'll be first person, singular, present, indicative, active. If it's a noun, it'll be nominative, singular. Okay, logos, not logus, not logon. It'll be logos, word.
Yep.
So what we have to learn is, and that's what we're doing over the last week and the next couple of weeks, is take what's in accordance and then say, oh, it does actually say genitive, first person plural, genitive. So what's the genitive form of we? Oh, it's our.
Yeah. Okay.
Or of us, but that's a bit ugly. So yeah, this is what we're getting we're starting to get a little bit clever now.
Yeah, okay.
We've got to go beyond just saying, oh, accordance says we. Well, yeah, but accordance is only giving you the lexical meaning.
Yep.
You have to think so, and that's a new expectation.
Yeah, that's
But
fine.
it is going to be there in the week 12 quiz, and that's why I'm going to smash your heads for the next 3 weeks.
Not literally though. That's not a literal thing.
No, that's not a literal thing. Blessed are they who take your little ones and smash their heads against the verb system.
That's a psalm, right?
Psalm 137.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit like Gaza, doesn't it?
Yep.
Anyway, so we're now trying to get a little bit sophisticated in our use of our rudimentary biblical languages to actually show that we're not just copying and pasting, we're actually understanding what accordance is telling us.
Unfortunately, I'm a little Pagani. A little bit.
A little Pagani?
A little bit
Wow, that's
Pagani.
what I
A
did
little bit
yesterday.
rural.
Okay. Very good. That's very good. Very good comeback. Okay. So, there's the last point. Making the best use of Accordance Bible software. So Accordance gives us all this fantastic information. Chris tells me that once every 1,000 times it's wrong. I wouldn't know. Chris knows Greek way more than I do. But, just because Accordance says it doesn't mean it's right. But it's going to be right more often than you and I are. So 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, Accordance is going to be correct. Occasionally the scholars will have a disagreement. Hey, we're not playing in that league. We just want to know what it probably means. Okay. And that's where you get that stuff in the commentaries and in the theological word dictionaries and those sorts of things, if you want to tease out that. So when it says, pater haimon, it's so pater, of course, is because that's nominative. Actually, it's vocative, but we're not even learning the vocative form, vocative case. 9 times out of 10, there's that formula again. The nominative and the vocative are the same. Vocative is when I'm speaking directly to you. Oh, Keith, buddy, would you do such and such? Keith in that sentence is vocative because I'm speaking to you. That's the case of direct speech. Whereas if I say, Keith brought me, or Keith brings me an apple, then Keith is the subject of the verb to bring. And if I say, Chris, would you push Keith out the door? He's annoying me. Then Keith is the object.
I've been an object.
You feel objectified? Okay. What a pity. Poor old Zoe is enjoying this all on her lonesome because there's nobody else online that I can see.
Wine.
There we go.
Not wine.
It's all being recorded.
Not yet, I don't.
We're driving her to the wine, but we haven't got there yet. Okay, so next 3 or 4 weeks, we've really got to practice not just knowing where to find stuff, but knowing how to use it. And it's just a little step up in our practice. Yeah, and I mean, it took me hours to mark the quiz this morning, poor me, because almost everybody got almost everything wrong. So those 1 or 2 people did well, bravo for you. But I mean, it was just a little bit more challenging, and people have been away for a couple of weeks and the brain was still getting back into gear and so on. Now we know where we're going. Okay, verbs in English. There are 3 sets of pairs to keep in mind: finite and non-finite. As you love labels. Finite verbs are verbs that have a subject, and so they're specified. That makes them finite. Non-finite verbs are infinitives, and participles, because they don't have subjects, and they're not pinned down in the way that a regular verb is. So one category of verb, this is in English as much as Greek or Hebrew, you have finite verbs, particular tense, particular person, particular voice, etc. And you have non-finite, ones that are not defined. Then we have dynamic and stative. And the main difference to be aware of there is, as I understand it, a dynamic verb is a verb which is making something happen, and a static verb is about something which is status quo. There's no change. So So the verb to be and the verb to become and the verb to exist, these are not verbs that do anything. They're verbs that describe a state of being. Here I am, kind of thing. Okay. So we will occasionally come across it, particularly in Wednesday, we'll come across it. Accordance will occasionally say static verb. You go, oh, I know what was that again? What was a static verb? And you have transitive and intransitive. It's true in English, obviously, as well as in others.
Dynamic was just that it
Making something actually happen. The other is describing something which is, rather than something which is happening.
I just missed it.
Yeah. And Zoe, don't forget to jump in and correct any of my infelicities. Will do, she said, sipping on her wine glass. And transitive and intransitive. Transitive verb is something where the action, way I describe it, the action is transferred through to the object. Okay, so I kick the ball. The action is going into an object. Whereas if it's I think, there's no object. The action is not. The action is still happening here. Or even something like I explain. Okay, I have this conversation a lot with my students that are learning better English, having come from different language backgrounds. They'll often say, I explain her such and such, and I'll say, explain to her. Okay, because a intransitive verb, if you're going to relate it to an object, you need an indirect object. And we do that in English by putting to in front of the indirect object. That's how we show it. With Hebrew, you'd probably use le, meaning to or for the sake of. Okay. And in Greek, it'd often be a sort of prepositional phrase, I'd be guessing. But so some verbs actually transmit the action to the object. Others just talk about the action, and you've got to find another way to describe what's happening. And that's an intransitive verb. You can Google any of these anytime. There are 1,000 websites that explain English grammar. So parsing an English verb, we would pay attention to person and number, first, second, third person, singular or plural. But in English, we don't worry about gender when it comes to a verb. And generally, we don't worry about gender with nouns either. We used to have actors and actresses and so on, okay? We used to have priests and priestess. And people who don't like the ordination of women will talk about those Anglican priestesses because they're not really priests. I mean, a priestess is a kind of slinky kind of pagan woman doing amazing things on the Temple Plaza. So these words become loaded culturally, okay? Priestess invokes a whole lot of other cultural associations than priest. Tense and aspect, and we'll talk about that a lot. But tense and aspect, we pay attention to that. Is it past tense? Is it present tense? Future? Is it completed? Is it repeating? Is it continuous? You know, is it habitual? And so on. And then voice and mood. So active voice is the default. In English we'd say active, passive, and we'd probably say reflexive. Certainly we'd do that in French, I think. We used to when I was a kid. But in Greek, we're going to say active, middle, and passive. Okay. All right. And in verb land, we don't have declensions. Okay. Declensions are the names for the cardboard boxes into which we put the nouns and all the other noun forms like adjectives, and so on. In verb land, all these inflections generate conjugations. And if you did French at high school, you might remember your verb conjugations. And if you did Latin at high school, I wanted to do Latin at high school, but the year that I started at Brisbane River High School was the first year they didn't teach Latin. came that close to learning Latin at school. That would have been such a good thing. I'm not going to say it would have been more use than French. I'm just going to say it would have been very useful.
I still find it odd that they teach French here in schools. Why? Why would you? In Australia, why don't you teach ancient
What was the
language?
question?
Oh, sorry.
Pourquoi? Pourquoi français fait Australie? I mean,
It's really
dans
funny.
Australie. Fee is Arabic.
Oh, Greg. Oh, Greg.
Because we lived in Europe, we had to learn. It was mandatory.
Yeah,
we had to
it's
learn
true,
French and
it's
German.
true.
We lived in Europe, but in Australia,
But
We normally get
partly reflects our cultural baggage in the Anglosphere.
yeah.
Okay. In other parts of Queensland, once upon you might have say North Queensland might have taught Italian,
Yeah. At
rather
my
than
school,
French.
we could choose French or Italian.
okay, because there were lots of Italians in the area.
Yeah, I was in fun.
There probably are no areas in Australia that have lots of French because we didn't like them coming. We used to bang, bang, bang at their ships and so on. Okay, but yeah, it's still to my surprise when I ran into my high school French teacher. I'm not going to tell that story.
Good.
But when I ran into my high school French teacher at a dinner to do with field education studies from universities years ago in a different life, I remember saying to what used to be Miss Garnett, there are still people studying French?
Yeah, but
Why? Pourquoi, mademoiselle?
my daughter's
Pourquoi?
13. She's got to choose language. She speaks very good Mandarin and Japanese, and she wants to stop those and do French. I'm like, no, and I can't, because some of her friends who don't have that skill of Asian languages are going, we've heard French is easy, see, we're going to do that. She wants to move with them.
Of course she
And I
does.
can't get it into her head. No. French, I'm not going to use it. Not
Well, you might.
not where she's going. She's not going to use it.
she's probably not.
Zoe, you do have a right of reply
Japanese,
on the integrity
No,
of
she
French
does.
language
She
learning.
She's going to be some kind of interpreter or something. You can just tell from
Oh, okay.
the way she is. And naturally, she picks it up.
But
I think from a practical point of view, European languages are still far easier for us to learn. There's a lot of cultural baggage in the geographical isolation of Australia, and we don't see the value of languages, and trying to communicate that is one of the first issues in doing any second language acquisition. So making it a European language makes it far more palatable. But the reality is it's a neurological processing skill, and it's got very little to do with what language it is, and more so how to understand first language acquisition, second language acquisition, and ways of thinking. So it's, to use an example, David, my husband, has lived a very interesting, eclectic expatriate lifestyle, and he has done smatterings of language around the world, including being forced to go to a Polish school for 3 years because he was naughty when he lived in Poland, but never learnt languages as such. And when he did Hebrew the first time, he learnt it reasonably well, but then he did it the second time, and I did it with him, and very quickly was able to go beyond what he had because I had a much better command of grammar and language. And my sister-in-law, his sister, now speaks about 8 languages because every time she learns a new language, it's just easier and easier to understand. And her range of languages actually go from French, German, Polish, Russian, Cyrillic, like in Mongolia, Amharic from Ethiopia, and now she's got a PhD in Warlpiri.
In what?
Warlpiri, which is one of the Central Desert languages. So she's a linguist with Northern Territory education.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
so you never know where French will take you. It might be New Caledonia for the Year 12 excursion. There are other options beyond New Caledonia. Okay, let's come now.
Yeah. I actually had a student once who went on a study tour to Tanzania, and she had taught herself Swahili, and she found herself in a group where they didn't have all common language, and she was translating from French into Swahili, even though she was an English speaker. because the guide and the French people couldn't communicate.
That was well planned.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Now my right of reply is finished.
Okay. Well, now I'm about to drive you nuts because I'm going to talk about Hebrew verbs. Okay. So just a kind of a heads up, Billy. So surprise, surprise, Hebrew verbs, like Hebrew nouns, basically derive from the tri-consonantal stem or the three-consonant stem. Okay. The nouns are more or less built that way, and the verbs tend to be built that way. And we showed you that some while back. We had a couple of examples of from the same three letters, you can make the verb, you can make the noun, you can make the adjective. And so one of the good things is, even more than in English, where if you know your Greek and Latin roots, you can more or less work out what the English word is. Okay. In Hebrew, if you can recognize the root, then you've got a real heads up as to what's going on here. And then even better, if you get to recognize some of the endings and some of the prefixes, then you actually know whether it's first person or second person and what stem it might be, what kind of tense or whatever it might be. So roots. Stems, which I stumbled into mentioning a couple of seconds ago, stems are modified roots that are modified in ways that reflect, and I actually find this absolutely fascinating, they reflect the voice, so that's active, middle, passive, and the intensity of the action. And I think this is a really clever design feature of Semitic languages, not just Hebrew, but particularly Hebrew. So a little obeisance there from me to the Hebrew scholars in the room. So you've got roots and stems. Then you get, and these are just, I love linguistic terms, affirmatives. These are little bits you stick on the front and the back, or even in the middle, depending on the case. And remember, there will always be irregularities. If, for example, the verb stem has the second and the third character are the same, then effectively it becomes a two-letter stem because the tongue finds it difficult to go bull, just goes bull, and so on. And if the middle character is a weak character, like a vav or a yod, then it's not going to survive going into the land of the verbs. It's going to come out with band-aids and stuff on. So you've got to have a little bit of imagination sometimes too. And this is where accordance does that for you. So these are elements which are, I love this, prefixed, infixed, or affixed at the end. Think like that. You can be prefixed, you can be infixed, or you can be affixed. And these patterns that are formed are how they indicate who's speaking, first, second, third person, the number and the gender. And in Hebrew verbs, the verbs reflect or are inflected for gender. So he says is different from she says. In English, we just change the pronoun. In Hebrew, you change the verb by putting a little extra bit on the end, whatever, or not putting it on the end. In terms of direct object, it's in Hebrew, that's often done by the use of pronominal suffixes. Okay, this will be so much easier in Arabic, but there you go. If something is happening and I'm doing it, it's happening for me or to me, then you can simply add E on the end of the verb. And that E sound tends to indicate to the Hebrew ear, first person, singular. Ka at the end tends to indicate to the Hebrew or the Arabic ear, second person, singular. So Nu on the end tends to indicate we. Sorry, first person plural. It may not be we, it may be our, and so on. Okay. So after a while, if you really get into the languages, you actually get to feel the texture, the sort of oral texture, the sound texture of the languages. And just like we all remember that R on the end of a noun probably means it's feminine. Okay, that's the feminine, like Robert and Roberta. We would be surprised if Roberta turned out to be a bloke, even in English. I know it can happen, but I mean, we would be surprised.
Big brains.
Okay, so pronominal suffixes can do that. And of course, we have the direct object marker, et. So remember, Elohim, bara Elohim et hashemayim. That's the direct object marker, the accusative marker. Now for the fun bit. You don't have to remember this, but you need to be able to remember that you have been shown at some stage. So there are, okay, this is not popping up in the order I expected, but never mind. This was meant to come up row by row. Never mind. So, okay, I know what's happened. I've actually pulled up an older version of the file off my laptop because it hasn't yet synced with the hard copy, with the copy on the computer at home. This could be interesting. Let's see where we go. Okay, so there are a number of stem patterns, and down the left-hand column, I've got a transliteration of their name, Cal, Nifal, PL, and so on. And they're like codes that tell us what's going to happen to the stem. So Cal is just the simple form, and the verb I'm using here is katal, partly because it's a strong verb that doesn't have letters that go AWOL when you do stuff to them. Okay, katal, the kaf and the tau, or the tet and the lamed, they're reliable. They're not going to turn into something else. So it's a good paradigm verb. It's also because when I first learned Hebrew back in 1970, this was the verb that was always used in the textbook, Weingreen's Introduction to Hebrew, whatever. So katal, and it means kill. So isn't that very topical? So in the Cal, it's the simple active form, and katal just means he killed. No other detail. In the Nifal, then it becomes niktal. It means either he was killed or he killed himself. So just by tweaking how the word is being spelt with a n on the front, you begin to give a different kind of nuance. PL, we'll talk about in a moment, makes it more intensive, either because it's stronger, you might even say nastier, or because it's repeated. So in the PL form of katal, it becomes kittal, and the extra dot in the tet is telling me to duplicate the tet. So it's not kittle, but kittal, okay? And so it would be probably translated as he massacred or he murdered, which is slightly more intensive than he killed. Okay, and they can do
like
all
he
this.
killed.
Yeah, like he killed dead, like dead killed, like really dead.
Killed.
Dead set. Okay. Similarly, oh yeah, I'm sorry. This is not the latest version of the file. Okay, let me just go back to this for a second. Sorry. Goodness me. So what I've had to split this over separate slides in the latest version that's on the website, but never mind. So in this pattern here, what that is showing you is that the form you're going to find in the lexicon, okay, so the lexical form is going to be the Cal, third person masculine singular. That's what the form is going to be in the dictionary, in the lexicon. Okay, so that's, if you're looking it up in the dictionary, that's what you've got to look up under. Okay, same as with nouns. Remember that the simplest, if it's a masculine noun, then the masculine singular form is how it gets put in the dictionary. Okay, if it's a feminine noun, then it goes in the feminine, the spelling order of the feminine singular form, not the feminine plural form. Okay. Just to illustrate PL. So this is again something. Well, I've got Gesenius's Hebrew grammar as part of my accordance. So I just said, let's just go and have a quick look at this. So the fundamental idea of PL is to make something busy and eagerly with the action. So I'm skipping down to the middle. So whereas yakak means to laugh, in the PL it means to make sport of, or to tease, or to jest. Okay, to the word sha'al, which is the word for ask, I ask, which, by the way, is where the name of Saul comes from. So the opening chapter of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, no, 1 Samuel, the opening chapter of 1 Samuel has the birth of Samuel, and it's got a little aphorism there saying, I'm calling him Shamuel, because I asked him of the Lord. That's actually probably the birth legend for Saul, and it's being recycled as the birth legend for Samuel, because Saul was on the nose in the eyes of the people responsible for the Deuteronomic history. The whole point of that little one-liner in 1 Samuel 9 is, I called the boy Shaul because I Shauled him from the Lord, and it's now been repurposed as a birth narrative for Samuel. So, and the same to bury, it means to bury lots of people and so on. And the same thing happens in Syriac and in Arabic, which I'm sure you're very excited about. Okay, then there's a few other verb forms, pu'al, hifal, hofal, and hithpa'al. It's the same kind of pattern. You're going to see these referenced in the instant details box, and they have a particular, and the word pu'al, hifal, and so on, they give you a clue as to what the pointing, what the Hebrew vowels are going to be like. Okay, so pu'al is passive rather than active. That's one of the differences from PL, but it still means intensive or repeated action, but it's passive. So I would perhaps translate kutal as involuntary death, something which happened to me. I wasn't choosing it. Okay, so involuntary death. Hifel has a causative sense, so it comes out as he made to kill. He made it happen. Hoffel is the passive form of that, and so he was made to kill, like the devil made me do it, kind of thing. And Hithpael is passive and intensified, so he was made to kill himself. These are just examples of how slightly different forms of the verb stem convey different aspects of voice and also different aspects of intensity. Now, we have nothing like that in English. So it's a very Semitic way of working with language. We're not learning Hebrew as such, but we simply have to know that if our accordance detail says this is a pu'al from such and such a verb, we go, oh, pu'al, that's right. And again, with your instant details, you can quickly look up what pu'al or PL means. Mind yourself. Okay. Going to take a little bit of break before we jump into the verbs. And if you've got access to accordance, you might want to open your accordance at this point, because what you can probably see on the screen are 3 versions from the Bible of the statement that we get from Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Okay, and this is a verb which echoes through into the New Testament, as we will see in both Galatians and also in Romans. So it's worth playing around with this yourself at some stage, but there are just a couple of interesting points to note. So, for example, you notice in the second line of Hebrew, the second last word is nafsho, which is nefesh with a pronominal suffix or his at the end. So nefesh, you add a O on the end, okay? That changes the balance of the things. So you've got to go from nefesh, it becomes naf, and then show. And that, of course, means his spirit or his soul, his nefesh, okay? In the Greek, it's got he, suke, mu. So suke is soul, as in psychology and so on, okay? But it's he, suke, mu, my soul, not his soul. So if you're doing a little bit of a study on this verse and you're looking at it in Habakkuk, and then you went to see how it's treated in the Greek translation of the Septuagint, there's been an interesting shift there. Okay, so up in the second line we've got suke mu in him, and so I'm not going to place my soul in him, and then we've got dikaios, but the one who is righteous, ek pistios, from faith, but in the Hebrew it's in his faithfulness will live. Okay, whereas in the Greek it's from my faithfulness will live. So this is a little saying which has kind of morphed a little bit as it's gone from the Hebrew tradition into the Greek tradition, and then Paul picks it up and quotes it in Galatians and Romans, and he says those who are justified, the one who is justified by faith, or dikaios ek pistios, the one who is righteous out of faith, and he doesn't go his faith, my faith, God's faith, he just skips the pronoun, will live. So you've got this little kind of slippery thing going on, and one of the things we can do is we work through the accordance, look at the instant details. You could have the English, or you can have the Hebrew in the first column. You could have the LXX in the second column, and you have the English in the third column. As you put your cursor over with the instant details on, you're going to pick up these nuances. Now, accordance is not going to tell you how to solve that problem. For that, you're going to have to go into the commentaries and read the discussion. It's not just going to fall off the grapevine into your cup so you can drink it freshly squeezed. So little nuances going on here as to what is Habakkuk saying. Okay, and if Jeanette Matthews was here, we'd have a full-on exposition of this. But what exactly is Habakkuk saying about how the righteous person is going to survive because of their faith? The righteous person because of his faith. We'd say there these days in English. So the righteous is going to be able to stand and so on because of this trustworthiness. And again, the Hebrew word that's in the middle there is the word amen, which we know as amen. Okay, so you've got aleph and mem and nun. Don't worry about the vowels so much. And that's what we know as amen, but it's the verb that actually means to stand. So something is going to last. Something is going to remain standing if it's reliable, if it's trustworthy. Okay, so the righteous in his own steadfastness is going to be is kind of what's happening there in the Hebrew. That's changed a bit in the Greek. It's because of my faithfulness, God's faithfulness, that he's going to live. So there's a little bit of a nuance going on there. And Paul has picked it up from the Septuagint, of course, because Paul probably did not read the Old Testament in Hebrew, even though presumably he could have. He presumably is working from a Greek, because he always seems to quote from the Greek rather than from the Hebrew. Even James, which of course James didn't give the speech in Acts chapter 15, Luke wrote it. But Luke has James giving a speech based on the translation in the Septuagint, which says something quite different from the same verse in the Hebrew. And the whole point of James's speech is the Septuagint, which James probably had never heard of or looked at in his life. So, we get these linguistic sort of tricks and slips going on. So worth playing around, work your way through the Hebrew of that verse using the instant details. Have a look at what's going on there. Look a little bit to the right to see what's going in the Septuagint, and then have a look at how that's being translated either in an NRSV, or if you have it and it's upstairs in the library, open up the Jewish Publication Society translation, and then you'll get a Jewish English translation of Habakkuk. not an English translation, which is influenced by the Reformation or influenced by St. Paul. Okay, so again, use the tools to kind of dig in and kind of work out what's going on.
There's your NRSV.
I'm sorry?
There's your NRSV.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they have NRSV as part of their accordance, but they may not have bought the JPS. Okay, we've got to move on because we've only got about 15 minutes left to the break. So with that little refreshing break, let's jump into Greek verbs. Don't you feel good?
Chris just left. So,
It's like, forget
he-
it.
Chris knows this bit. Okay, so the first thing, some headline things. Greek verbs have to agree in person and number with the subject. So if the subject is Juliet, then the verb has to be feminine, singular. Okay, if Juliet is the subject, not if she's the object. The stem, same kind of deal. The noun stem and the verb stem are 9 times out of 10 are going to be the same 3 or 4 letters in Greek. Sometimes, depending on what those letters are, we'll never actually see them in the wild looking quite that way. But scholars tell us that in the background, this noun, that verb come from the same stem and the same root. Okay. Inflections, same deal. We're going to put little fiddly bits on the front, on the end, in the middle to do with personal endings, first, second, third person. And the prefixes and the infixes are for tense, present tense, future tense, aorist, second aorist, perfect, pluperfect, etc. Okay. And the basic pattern goes like this. I'm sorry, the color's not brilliant. The green is the stem. Okay. So for the verb to throw, the verb is bellow. And that's where we get ballistic. A ballistic missile, something which we throw or we project it through the air. Okay. So bellow, but the stem is not B-A lambda. The stem is B-A-L, single L, not double L. Okay. So you've got your stem. And then if it's just present tense, you're just going to add maybe a joining vowel and your personal ending, basically O. So bellow. Okay. But if you're going to change it into like aorist or imperfect or future, then you're in the case of things like aorist and imperfect, you're going to put a prefix on the front. You're going to put an e on the front. So it becomes bell with a single L, and then on in the case of the imperfect, or sa in the case of aorist, and so on. So after a while, you'll get to recognize these patterns, but it's kind of like joining Lego blocks together. You start with a basic verb stem, and then you say, okay, if it's going to be future, then I don't need to add an augment on the front, but I will have to insert a sigma between the stem and the personal ending, because that's how they make the future. Future tense. Right?
Make the future with a sigma.
Yes, they insert a sigma. So I'll show you how this works in real life, but let's not worry about these examples. Okay. Again, you're obviously not going to learn this off by heart, and this is not going to look as nice as the version I finished off last night, but never mind. That's a trap for young players in terms of not picking up the latest version. So present tense, you just use the present stem. You may need to use an o or an e to make it join on nicely. And then you use your what are called the primary personal endings. And that's going to be o or o, ice, a, omen, ete, usi. Okay. So in the case of the verb luo, it's going to be luo, luais, luei, luomen, luete, luusi. Now, in a real Greek class, you'd be memorizing those this week. But we're just going to know it happens.
Stop it.
Chris will make you learn this at St. Paul's.
Stuff.
Know these anyway by now.
What I've just put up are the endings for an aorist. So if you look down to aorist 1, because there are two forms of aorist. The aorist, you do use an augment or prefix, and the tense formative, which you infix, is sigma alpha. Okay, and then you have your primary endings. So it becomes elusar, elusas, eluset, elusamen, elusatet, elusan. And you'll notice samen and satet are just variations of omen and etet. So the we and the you plural, after a while you get familiar with those sounds. I had a much better version of this I worked on last night, and that's the version on the website, by the way. Okay, in the case of imperfect and second aorist, we use these endings, on, es, et, omen, etet, on. But the tricky bit is, in the case of the imperfect, you put an et on the front and you just use the present stem. In the case of the second aorist, you still put an et on the front, but you use a special form of the verb. Now, people get a bit freaked out about second aorist, but it's just like we have some English verbs where the different tenses sound more or less the same. Yeah, I say, I said, I will say, I should say, I used to say, say, and okay, said, that's kind of said, and so on. And saith used to be a form in the King James Version. He saith unto them, and so on. Okay. But what about a verb like think or drink? Okay. I drink, I drank. Okay. Or think, I thought. I used to think, but I thunk. That's right. You can't, it doesn't work. And these are called broken verbs. They don't actually, like child, we don't add an S to the end. It's children. Okay. I mean, that's a noun, not a verb, unless we say, I'm childing. But I mean, so in English as well, we have forms that don't follow the usual pattern. So man, men, woman, women, child, children, and so on. So sometimes words don't follow the pattern. And that's what a second aorist is, simply a verb which, for whatever reason, it doesn't use the regular stem. It goes and borrows its stem from somewhere else. So you can't have a second aorist with luo, but you can have a second aorist with lambano, which, as we know, is I receive or I give. But the verb stem for lambano is lab, L-A-B. Okay, not lamba, because that's too hard to say. So over time, it becomes lab. It becomes a second aorist. So that's the on, es, en, omen, ete, on. And then the final one I put up as an example is perfect past tense. And you have to actually not only put an augment, but you've got to duplicate the first syllable or the first sound. It's usually a syllable, a consonant, I mean. So in the case of luo, it becomes le, lu, ka, men. Le, lu, carmen. We have loosed. Okay. So there are predictable patterns, and after a while, if you see what's obviously a verb, but it's got SA, sigma alpha, in the way it's being written, your brain just goes aorist. Okay, and if you see kappa alpha, even before you've noticed the duplication on the front, your brain just goes perfect. Not fantastic, but perfect tense. It's just like a little mental cue. Okay, so we're not going to be learning that. It's way too complicated for our purposes, but just to give you a kind of a heads up on the terrain. And so FYI.
But you're not going to pop a question in the tests on this?
You can trust me. Okay, so this one is worth looking at, and I think it does actually say, remember the patterns. But we don't really expect you to know this off for examining purposes, but you're going to see the first person singular over and over again. Sorry, present indicative active first person singular over and over again because it's any verb ending with O. Blepo, Lego, Fagio, you name it, Lambano, whatever. If you see a verb that's ending with an omega, almost certainly it's present tense, first person singular. If it ends with omen or amen, that is probably we. Whether it's omen, salmon, camen, if it's got something like omen in the end, it's probably first person plural, and so on. So you'll just get to, and because the narrative in the New Testament is so often third person singular, he said, he went, he healed, he spoke, whatever, if that's in the narrative. So you're also going to recognize third person singular really, really quickly because it just gets used all the time. Okay, so blepo and blepe, for example, baptizo and baptize, you're just going to recognize those forms so easily. Okay, this is comparing the present and the future. You notice they're almost the same. The difference is there's a little sigma has wriggled in between the stem and the ending. That's what makes a future. Don't they put will? It's just at a sigma. Okay, but there's always a but. Okay, but what if the verb stem ends with a difficult sound like d or k or, sounds like these? So if it ends with a pi, p, or a beta, or a phi, and you add a sigma to it, it becomes psi. Okay, so the future of blepo is not blepso because the p and the s become psi. So it still sounds the same, but it's written as blepso, but with a psi. Okay, if it's a t or a d or a th or a z, which are dental sounds, you add an s, it just becomes an s. That's easy. Aren't you glad you don't have to remember this?
Yes.
And if if the stem ends with a kappa or a g or a ch or a s, and you add another s, it just becomes kasi. That's what I call the bed spring letter. Okay. So in the example of baptizo, okay, I baptize, baptizo. When it becomes future, it's baptizo. Because you can't really go baptizo. So the S takes over. And we see that in Mark chapter 1, verse 8. We've actually got an aorist and then a future. I, ego, it's actually an ego is being used for emphasis because it's not necessary. I baptized humas hudati. I baptize you with water. And that's hudos, water, hudea, water. But it's dative singular, which brings the sense of with. I baptize you with water, autos de. But he, this is John the Baptist talking, he will baptize you en pneumati hagio, in or with the Holy Spirit. Okay, so just a little example of the verbs slip sliding away with different kind of fittings depending on the tense. Okay, easy. More to come next week. Probably more to come at 8 o'clock if the truth's known. Not sure. I have no idea what Chris is going to do to you at 8 o'clock. All right, just very, very briefly. And let me talk about the photo guide. So this is not something that you will have received automatically as part of the Green Accordance Academic Collection, but you will have had the sample photo guide sampler. This is like upselling. Okay, they give you a little demo, but they don't give you the whole thing, but you can see a little bit of how it works. So the Accordance, what's now called the Bible Lands Photo Guide, it's had different names over several years. It provides high quality photos, but also some discussion and some explanation of the sites So in the Israel collection, there are more than 1,800 photos. In the Near East collection, 600 photos. There's no bias there, is there? And in the Egyptian collection, there's over 420 photos. So it's obvious bias. And I don't remember, I don't have the numbers for the other areas. The library installation of Accordance has or will have the complete photo guide installation. It certainly has the iteration prior to this. It's only in the last few months it's gone to a set of 6 different modules. So what used to be called Photo Guide 4 or even Photo Guide 5 will be on the copy upstairs. I'm not sure if we've ordered 6, but we need to, please. That would be lovely. So let me show you this. So that's an example from Nazareth. This is just for the people who are looking at the PowerPoint later. I want to just do a quick demo by going into Accordance. Into Accordance, that's what it's called. Okay, so where am I going to find the photo guide? Well, the easiest place is to go into Library, and well, I've already got it open. It has remembered some things from being at home. So there's my photo guide collection under Visual. But I could always just go up here and type photo, and straight away it'll show me where the photo materials are. Oh, sorry. Okay. You're still looking at what I was showing you. Now I need to switch to Accordance.
Oh, I see. I see somewhere where I could type something.
Okay. So up the top, I type photo, and straight away it brings me to all this stuff.
Library. Pick library first. That's it. Yeah. And then see that search box. Type it in there.
But it's also probably under visuals.
Visual.
But anyway, if you don't have lots of visual files, just type start typing the name, and it'll find it for you.
Ooh.
Okay. So I'm going to start out by, I'm going to use the overview because that's what you have. And it's opened it up in a separate zone. That's really cool.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't figure out from the video how to open something in a separate zone.
You shibab.
Am I missing something? Because I watched the video 3 times. I was like, I still can't see what you're
so sad. You watched the video 3 times. I must be such a wonderful. Yeah.
No, not that. How do you open something in another?
It goes into a zone automatically.
So it goes in its own there.
Stretch it.
But you want to have a new window sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even a new window. Okay, so just follow what's happening here for a second. So I'm going to shut the library because I don't need it anymore. And now I've got the photo guide overview module is in that zone that's over there. But if I want I want the instant details to work, I discovered this afternoon while making the video, I've got to turn it on now before I go into the zone. So if I go into the zone, make it bigger, and then I want to use instant details, it doesn't work. What I discovered was I actually have to start the instant details while I'm in the regular zone. It goes all the way across the bottom, but then I've got to make it a floating window. Aha, now we're cooking with gas. I can expand the zone and my instant details will come with me. Okay. So this happens to be, it's amazing what it remembers. So this is the entry in the photo guide overview for Nazareth. Okay. I was playing around with it earlier, even though it was on a different computer, it's remembered it. Okay, just follow with me, stay with me for the time being with Nazareth. Okay, and so you get a bit of text and you get various photos. Now this is just the sampler, okay, but it has a few photos. And you can enlarge the photos anytime. And if you want to copy them and put them into an essay or put them into a PowerPoint, you just go right click, copy picture, paste it into your Word file, whatever, okay? What it's showing us here are the ancient caves underneath the Basilica in Nazareth. And not only are there caves down there where people used to live, but these are not natural shapes. The top of the caves have been flattened out and carved and so on because they put extra buildings on top of the cave, and you need to make slots for your little stone house to be built on top of the cave. Otherwise, it just slides down the hill. So there's a whole story in there. Let's not worry about that for now. I'm just going to go escape. Let me show you what that looks like if I go into my Israel one. Okay, then you get something like that. I'm going to just type in my entry, Nazareth. Now it's more or less the same, but there's a lot more photographs. And I mean, some of them are quite fascinating. That's an unusual view of the Basilica in Nazareth because we're not normally sitting a couple of 100 meters in the air looking down at it. Why are you not getting the... Okay, well, it's good if people said so. Okay, that's interesting. So for some reason, Zoom doesn't pick up when I expand the photo. I've just expanded that photo.
Wow.
And it's not showing up, but it does show up in the video that's on the website. Okay, so there's some issue there with possibly, no, Zoom. I don't have time to sort it out. Okay, so I'm about to show you the photos. Suffice to say that if you can just notice here, that's the same photo we had before. This is a slightly different photo, just a couple of meters to the left of the same spot. And I've crawled all over these caves at different times. I know exactly which bits of the cave structure underneath the basilica we're looking at. So these are the reasons people settled at Nazareth in the 1st century BCE, because they found there were already caves ready for them to occupy. And they're cool in summer and they're warm in winter, and you can use some of them to store grain and olive oil and so on. So this is a really useful feature for the first people settling in Nazareth. Okay, so here we've got outside and under the basilica are the remains of ancient Nazareth. The older remains include several grottos. Well, they're actually caves, but never mind. Most of the visible remains, however, are from the Christian era onwards and include the palace of the Crusader Archbishop and so on. Okay. Again, the main advantage, the main value of the photo guide is that it's like an illustrated Bible dictionary. It's not as detailed a Bible dictionary as the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary, but it does give you pretty good material. Okay, but it also gives you graphic elements, which can be charts, they can be 3D models, they can be photographs. There's all kinds of sort of visual material which are embedded into the photo guide. I actually use it quite a lot when I'm preparing material for people to use on a study tour. I put together a day-by-day little digital booklet, and I'll sort of copy material from the Bible Land photo guide to populate that material. And then I've often got my own photos anyway, but I find that quite useful. One last thing to show, if I want to get into that, but I haven't gone there by opening the photo guide. Suppose I'm in Luke, and I go down to about verse 26. That's a nice verse, isn't it? In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth. Okay, so that's this bit here. Okay, in the month, the 6th, was sent the angel Gabriel from God, ice pollen, to a city of Galilee, which name Nazareth. Okay, so Nazareth. So either in the English or the Greek, but better in the English, I can simply go right click or control click. I can use research. Now, research is not something I think I've shown you before. Click on research and then go all. And again, it's going to come up with this zone. And just get into it, but it's hidden behind there, so I can't make it bigger. I'm sorry. Will this work? Yes, it does. Okay, so it's found everything in my accordance which mentions the word Nazareth. Obviously, there are Bibles. Okay, well, that's a big surprise. There are dictionaries. So, for example, here's the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary article on Nazareth. And it's actually written, sorry, I went on the wrong one. It's meant to be Anchor Yale. What happened? Maybe I've got to double click. Okay, yeah, that looks more like it. This is the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary entry on Nazareth. It's written by James F. Strange, who's one of the top archaeologists in the Galilee. His father also called James Strange, which is very strange. He, I think, worked at Megiddo, but James the Younger has been the head archaeologist at Sepphoris for many, many years. And so he's written the piece in the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary on Nazareth, which is just across the creek from Sepphoris. So you've got a lovely article there by James Strange, which includes references to Josephus and so on. If I come down to visual, okay, there's lots and lots of resources. I can go into my photo guide Israel. You're not seeing that either. It's come up now. Yep. You're seeing that? Yep. So in other words, I can go looking for an entry just like I might look up a dictionary or a commentary, or I can ask Accordance using the reference command or the research command to find me all the resources in my copy of Accordance which are relevant to this word, which is actually a pretty powerful tool, either for your own study, you're working on an assignment, getting a Bible study ready in the parish. It is a pretty cool piece of equipment. Whether it's worth a couple of $100 US to have at this stage, that's not my call. It's on the copy of Accordance upstairs. You can always use it and make yourself at home. So I'm going to stop there because